Okay, I played this game far after the hype died out, and while you're all just completely done with this game, I'm still reeling from it, so I'm going to talk about it. Is that cool? Cool. Before we start, this video will be spoiling everything, and I mean everything. I had no idea how to structure this, so I just explained absolutely everything that happens and added criticism when it felt right. In retrospect, this was a bad idea, but at least I know better now. Anyway, I recommend anyone who hasn't experienced all 3 endings that Undertale has to offer to just bugger off. And yes, I think everyone should play this game. There's more to it than the fanbase would have you believe. And before you even catch wind of my admittedly mixed feelings on this game, I'd like everyone to know that I still recommend it. Oh, and I also spoil funny games. Trust me, it's very necessary. Watch it and come back, it's a masterpiece. And also, the gameplay in this video isn't mine. I couldn't be bothered to record anything. You can have a bit of fun figuring out who I stole the footage from. The game starts off with a very refreshingly old-school intro screen. I find this pretty subversive because it makes itself out to be a throwaway NES-esque opening cutscene that you initially think nothing of. Anyone who's actually played this game knows that the story balloons in several directions by the end, but this innocuous intro makes it an honest surprise when you later find that narrative depth that's to come. All you need to know right now is that there was a huge war between humans and the monsters lost. Now everyone's trapped underground. Anyway, you're a nameless child who falls down a hole into the monster world for no reason in particular. Then you meet this flower dude and he teaches you how the game works. This is how battles work in this game. You play little bullet hell segments in place of normal turn-based RPG systems. This could have made the battles a little bit more interesting and less repetitive, but instead it did the opposite. Yet, the gameplay of this game is kind of my least favorite part of this game. Okay, now I'm not dumb enough to think that all games need to be fun in order to be good. In fact, I think that a bad game plus a good story equals a good game. But in this case, I think it kind of gets in the way of the story, and I think it could have done fine with a conventional RPG battle system. This quirky little bullet hell thing didn't need to be here. Hey Toby, did you not think that the story could stand on its own? Come on. To understand where I'm coming from, let's talk about a completely different game. I really like Super Meat Boy. It's a masterpiece of modern game design. I'm pretty sure it single-handedly rendered obsolete the entire genre of difficult indie platformers with spikes in them. It's almost perfect. There are a couple blemishes, like Mr. Scripted boss fight over here, but I can't say I didn't have tons of fun in the other parts. Why is Super Meat Boy so great? One thing, it's the movement. No other platformer controls like Super Meat Boy, and you have to play it to really understand how different it is. Meat Boy flops around like a fish, loose and tight at the same time somehow. I love it. I also really like the art direction in Super Meat Boy, especially for a game that totally could have been an entirely abstract, minimalist experience. So going back into the gameplay world, let's look at the opposite of the spectrum. Another famous indie platformer with spikes in it called VVVVVV, or just V, or V6 times. I have not seen a consensus on how to pronounce this thing. I finished this game once, and it was a wholeheartedly awful experience. Unlike Meat Boy, Captain Viridian is rigid. You press right, and he goes right away at a set speed. It's transparently just an exercise in timing. I mean, technically all video games become an exercise in timing if you deconstruct them enough, but Meat Boy does a far better job at hiding it. When I play that game, I feel like I'm controlling a character. When I play V6 times, I feel like I'm pressing the correct buttons to advance a movie. And side note, you can go too far the other way too. N++ is aggravating to play because of how floaty and loose the ninja dude is. I don't want to feel like I'm controlling a defiant child in zero gravity when I play a precision-based platformer. And this is unrelated, but the level designers have a really bad habit of making the player backtrack through every level by putting the key to the door at the end of the level and the actual door at the beginning. Stop that. Now let's look at Undertale. The heart thingy you control is completely rigid, moving around just like Captain Viridian, but with 4 directions of boringness instead of 2. It's especially dull when it starts getting all cute with the movement mechanics, like on the DDR fish fight and this goddamn spider lady. Why are you here?! The first time I started fighting enemies in this game, I wondered exactly how it was going to keep this gimmick interesting for the entire game. The answer was that it just didn't. And also, it doesn't really become challenging until the very final moments of the game, and the genocide route, but we'll get to that later. There just aren't enough variables in this model to really create a smooth difficulty curve. Anyway, the story is the important part of this game, so I'm not going to stay on this for too long. And to start off Undertale's theme of subverting expectations, Flowey does this thing where he pretends he's about to give you something and then it hurts you.
Move around. Get as many as you can. Oh.
I think this is a good way to get across early on that Undertale is about subverting expectations and it isn't going to be a very normal experience. And it taught us how the gameplay works at the same time. Good job. So after Flowey terrorizes us, we're immediately met with this goat person. Her name's Toriel. She acts as an immediate comfort to your traumatized child self, as well as a pretty biting satire of video game tutorials. Like, she literally handholds you through sections of the game that you probably could have done yourself if you thought about it for a bit. She tells you that it's a good idea to try talking to the enemies you encounter instead of fighting them. The whole game is pretty much built around this fight or befriend attitude, and it's great. It's the main moral choice through which the entire narrative hinges, so while there are a lot of subtly different ways this game can go down, I'll be giving you my experience, because that's the title of the video. Toriel guides you through part of these purple ruins, and you guide yourself through the rest, and there's puzzles and enemy encounters, and it's all very cute, and then you get to her house at the end of the area. After futzing around a bit in the house, the first real drama happens. Toriel doesn't want you to leave. She's totally into being your mother figure for the rest of time because everyone else she's met has been killed by someone named Asgore. More on him later. You don't want this, so she demands you prove yourself to her before you can leave. This is the only place in the entire game where someone could make a good case for the bullet hell gameplay. The sudden huge-ass difficulty spike of this encounter really adds to the drama of the situation. I'm glad that Toriel isn't as easy as the rest of the monsters you fight in the ruins. Of course, Toriel won't kill you, so it isn't actually a difficulty wall, it just contributes to the realism. And that's important. She'll never kill you. When you get to low health, her attacks just bounce off of you. She's ultimately concerned for your well-being, and she's honestly worried. This factors into a theory I have about this game as a whole that I'll get back to later. Okay, flashback. On the way up to Toriel's house, there's this hallway with 3 frogs in it. All 3 of them have something tutorializing to say, but one of them tells you that if you can spare someone to end the fight, their name will appear as yellow in the battle screen. However, sparing is just saying you don't want to fight, and eventually you might have to spare someone whose name isn't yellow. This happens right before Toriel decides to call you, so the foreshadowing is pretty clear. Except that there's a frog further back that gives you the opposite solution by saying you can spare monsters if their health is low enough, so this is the reason I think 90% of players end up accidentally killing Toriel when they get to that totally not random critical strike in the middle. I'm pretty sure that's supposed to happen though, leaving you in tears at this goddamn scene. It does feel a bit like cheating though, like Toby is artificially pushing us to the more well-written outcome. But if you're anything like me, you probably keep on resetting your save trying to figure out how to spare her. It's a very convoluted solution, so I don't think players are supposed to get it the first time. Eventually, I figured out that there's more dialogue than just ... if you keep on pressing the spare button, so I did that. You have to do it 20 times, but then you get the feel-good, super cute goat hug and all is well because you were able to cheat the system. Hey, hey. And then this shit happens. Okay, this shit got me. Resetting the save is such a third-party action, literally quitting the game and restarting it. The game remembering things that you've done didn't even register in my mind. This is definitely one of the best moments of the game, even if it came about by totally not random critical strike. Also, that's probably the best place the title screen could have gone. So here's the real game. It's beautiful. It's snowing underground. Okay. This is where you meet Sans. He's kind of like an apathetic Tom Bombadil skeleton that makes bad puns. If you stop playing after you get the true pacifist ending, he's the most boring character. Also, he speaks in Comic Sans. People find this hilarious for some reason. Shortly after, you meet his brother, Papyrus. He's a lovable, naive, egotistical, also skeleton who spends a lot of time trying to capture you. He also speaks in Papyrus. People find this hilarious for some reason. The misadventures of these two skeletons take up a good portion of this section of the game. I dare say it's a bit of a low point. It's slow. The game stops every once in a while so we can have a big set piece where Papyrus attempts to capture you again in some absurd way, bantering with his brother a bit as well. It's aggravating, especially on repeat playthroughs. Okay, they're great characters. Sans in the Genocide run would have to be one of the best switcheroos a game has ever pulled on me, but we'll get to that later. Papyrus might seem a bit simpler by comparison, but he's subversive in that he's as egotistical as he is kind and well-meaning. It's a simple combination, but one that I haven't seen that much before. This probably could have worked if it was more condensed. Anyway, you travel through the forest until you find this nice town place. You spend some time talking with everyone, partaking in some more charming subversions of RPG tropes like the rabbit lady turning you down when you try to sell your stuff to her and the hotel receptionist giving you back your money since you only stayed in your bed for the length of a cutscene. Then you move on to your final encounter with Papyrus. He's had enough of you evading his thorough japes and decides he wants to capture you the old-fashioned way. Although, and this is important, during the battle you find out that he actually doesn't want to capture you on principle. Papyrus is only concerned with gaining the approval of his mentor Undyne and joining the Royal Guard. This factors into a theory I have about this game as a whole that I'll get back to later. To comment on the gameplay just a bit, odd, I know, Papyrus has made our heart blue, which temporarily changes the battle screen into a platformer. These kinds of unique movement changes mix things up in a refreshing way and are usually welcome. We win the fight by simply outlasting Papyrus's onslaught of bones. He's pretty disappointed that he wasn't strong enough to capture us and that he'll end up displeasing Undyne, but he gets over it pretty quickly after you tell him you'll be his friend instead, which is honestly just adorable. This is also where you find out from Papyrus that in order to get out of the underground, you have to reach the barrier keeping everyone down here and break it down using your super special human heart soul. And thus begins the increasingly convoluted soul economics aspect of the story. But then he invites us back to his house to hang out, and we get to one of the bigger problems I have with this game.
I don't like the funny parts of Undertale.
Now, some of it's okay. The massive amount of skeleton banter could perhaps be considered character development if there was less of it. Same with Dr. Alphys's avalanche of status updates and Toriel's comic motherly direction. That I'm fine with. But with stuff like the dating scenes and the aforementioned skeleton sitcom, and most of the battle sequences now that I think about it, it just really rubs me the wrong way. It doesn't lighten the mood, it distracts from it. It actually kind of offends me every time I remember that Toriel's death scene is in the same universe as Tsundere Plane. And again, some of the comedy is welcome, but I think it should have began and ended with the dialogue between characters. That stuff usually manages to be endearing and humanizing for the people involved. I think the game does this especially well in the later half with Alphys and her text messages. But we don't need the dating scenes. We don't need gimmicky characters to battle. We don't need any of that shit that has no use apart from attracting YouTubers. Okay? Okay. Glad you understand. Anyway, our goal as a character has been established. Travel eastward towards the barrier. Of course, we later find out that it isn't nearly that simple, but we'll get to that. And then comes the worst part of the game. This fucking cavern goes on forever and barely anything happens. You get stalked by Undyne a whole bunch in the form of multiple flashy set pieces that are barely more than cutscenes, and you meet a bunch of throwaway characters that don't matter and aren't interesting. That's 2.5 Game Grumps episodes worth of gameplay that I can just gloss over because this goddamn blue cave never ends. I guess this could be called build-up. It is a very special moment when you finally surface and get to face the fish lady that has been tormenting you so, but that's all it is. The only purpose that this massive array of caverns has is to build up the Undyne fight, with no skeleton sitcom or silly social media messages to develop the characters. It sounds like I really hate this game, but it gets good after this. But before we can get to that, we have to fight Undyne. She just straight up wants to murder you so she can take your special heart soul. You see, you could just leave the underground yourself, but Undyne says that Asgore, remember him, needs 7 human souls to completely break down the barrier and free the entire race of monsters forever. Apparently you can only just kinda break it by yourself. This fight is boring shit. I hate it. I hate being forced to play Dance Dance Revolution in the middle of a bullet hell game, and it's easy as sin until these bullshit yellow arrows come to fuck up your day.
Oh, what the fuck?
Narratively, this fight is pretty important though. Again, Undyne straight up wants to kill you. It's for a pretty tremendous cause, but she wants you dead. This factors into a theory I have about this game as a whole that I'll get back to later. So you beat Undyne by outliving her attacks until she gets flustered enough for you to run away. Straight into a lava land. What? Yeah, this is a minor point, but I don't really like how sectioned off the chapters of this game are. You have the Ruins, Snowdin, Waterfall, Hotland, the Core, and New Home. Aesthetically, they are entirely separate and have no real transition between them. You're in this purple place and then boom, snowy forest. It feels weird when I'm replaying the game and see Papyrus the Metaton branded cologne behind his ear, because in my subconscious mind, Metaton is in an entirely different universe. Like, I know the scene is technically on the same planet, but it's still a disconnect. Anyway, we're in Lava Land and it's too hot for Undyne, so she passes out. Players with the soul use the conveniently placed water cooler to save her, and then she runs off. Bye-bye DDR fish. You're supposed to follow her, but there's not really any way to know that right now. This is where you meet Dr. Alphys, the royal scientist. Dr. Alphys is the best character. Not just because she's adorable and I want to be her friend. She's legitimately the most developed character in the game. Out of every character, she has the most well-executed arc. We'll get to why after I'm done telling the story. So you meet Alphys when you enter her lab and find out that she has been observing your journey this whole time through tiny hidden cameras. The game plays this off as being cute. At the same time, we meet the evil rogue robot named Metaton, originally created by Alphys after he grandly bursts through the wall and subjects the player character to a deadly quiz show. These hijinks continue to show up periodically throughout Hotland. It's like a slightly more engaging version of the skeleton sitcom. Can you lose here? I don't know. In between, there's some puzzle solving, as well as occasional text messages you get from Alphys on your cell phone that you've had this whole time, and I forgot to mention it, and I couldn't really figure out how to work it into the script I'd already written. I'm pretty bad at this. This is great. Alphys' messages are first presented as a joke, like, haha, she's socially awkward and shit, look at her. After a while though, it turns out she's hyper self-conscious for reasons, and you've been helping her get through it by being friends with her. It slowly turns from a joke into a character arc, and it's touching. In the middle of this, we come across this dark cave, and this pointless shit happens. Yeah, who are you? I have yet to find any reason for this spider lady to even exist. The story just stops here. You don't ever see this character again after this. She has no bearing on the plot. Why is this here? It's pretty hard too. It's not a one-off joke like the Mad Dummy, which I haven't mentioned because I keep forgetting about it. If you ask me, this fight should have just been shoved into the Easter egg closet with the butter dragon to never be seen again. So after that short interruption, we reach this nice-looking hotel where we meet Sans again. We've actually been meeting him a whole bunch of times, but this is the first time in a while that it's been relevant to the story. During a scene that's so well executed that I regret summarizing it here, you find out that Sans is actually a very highly trained guard and that the only reason you're alive is a promise he made to a certain woman, saying that he would spare any human that came through that big door at the beginning. This explodes the character in a million different directions in such a short and punchy way that it's shocking. First he's a jokey side character, now he's Tom Bombadil. He actually explodes again in the genocide route, but like all good things in this video, we'll get to that later. The last place between us and the barrier is the core, and just like every other chapter transition, it's completely jarring. Now we're in Technoland. Deal with it. But something's amiss in Technoland, and this becomes apparent when Dr. Alphys can no longer accurately give us directions, telling us to go north when the correct direction is east, that kind of thing. You find out why when we meet Metaton in a dark room, and he tells us that Alphys has been playing us like a goddamn fiddle to make herself feel better, and he rearranged the core. How did you do that? To reveal that she had been faking those heroic acts of nerdism this entire time. The first time I got to this part, I thought he was lying, and it wasn't until I replayed the game and caught on to the foreshadowing that I really understood. Although I don't really know how I would have gotten the twist across better. So, Dr. Alphys has actively deceived and manipulated us to her own ends. This factors into a theory I have about this game as a whole that I'll get back to later. So as it turns out, Metaton is sick of pretending to be defeated and wants to kill you so he can take your soul and become a TV star in the human world. What a dick. This fight doesn't even attempt to teach you how it works. What are these ratings? Do I want them to go up or down? How much? Your heart can shoot now, which was tutorialized in a previous encounter that I didn't mention. It can make things disappear, except when it can't. Now the rules are self-consistent, it just takes a long time and probably several deaths to figure it out. For me, I didn't really understand the ins and outs of this fight until my second playthrough, and that's pretty egregious for a game that's essentially G-rated, let's not kid ourselves.
I'm really good at dancing.
Gotta move through that. Dodge it.
What the how is this supposed to—
You win this fight by surviving until your ratings reach 10,000, convincing Metaton that he is loved in the underground and doesn't have to leave. Oh, that's cute. So now that we're done with that, we're on our way to the barrier, except Alphys has one more thing to say. As it turns out, we can't leave the underground alone after all. We need our soul and Asgore's soul, which means we have to kill him. If all this soul economics is confusing to you, don't worry. It's honestly very clumsy and no set rules are ever really established. We're not done with Alphys, by the way. We'll get back to her character after her arc gets fully completed later. I'll also explain why she's the best character and how anyone who hates her doesn't understand the game she's in. Look forward to that. But now we're in the home stretch. It's a straight road to the game's ending. You walk through a grayscale version of Toriel's house as previously encountered monsters fucking bombard you with previously unheard exposition. They give you the whole backstory here all at once, and it's possibly the worst way they could have given this information to us. All I have is questions. Where did all these monsters come from? Why are they telling me this story? And where's Aaron? I'll try my best to summarize this new story dump, but it's gonna be tough, so bear with me for a bit. Anyway. 6 humans have fallen into the underground before you, and this story that everyone's telling us is about the first one. Also nameless and genderless, but fans like calling them Kara. After they fell down, they were greeted by the prince of monsters, Asriel, who took care of Kara and eventually took them in as a beloved sibling. I might be getting this all wrong. The presentation is so clumsy, just please bear with me. Then the human grew gravely ill and died. Bummer. So Asriel carried the human through the barrier so they could rest with their people, but was then mistaken for the cause of Kara's death and was murdered himself, setting off the huge war mentioned at the start. Man. This all happens while ultra-motivating orchestral music swells in the background. You can taste this build-up. You should be smiling too. Aren't you excited? Aren't you happy? You're going to be free. You get to this really final-looking hall where you meet Sans again. He does this thing where he judges you for how many people you killed on your journey. It's kind of forced. Okay, Asgore's just a bit further along. After all this build-up, you're completely ready to fight this dude, or if you're paying attention to the story, you're disparaging at the fact that killing him will leave thousands of monsters worse off as you leave the underground alone. This moment where you meet the dude and walk to the battleground is pretty uniquely solemn. Neither of you want to follow through with this, although Asgore seems pretty cold about this whole thing. A trip to the dentist? No. I'm guessing this is because he killed 5 kids before you, the murderer. This factors into a theory I have about this game as a whole that I'll get back to later. So now we're at the barrier. Looks a bit more like a hallway, but whatever. It's time for our totally final, no fake-outs battle. Asgore destroys the mercy button, because he doesn't deserve mercy, and the battle starts. The game doesn't communicate this very well at all, but the only way to progress is to fight. But don't worry, right before he gets to 0, he keels over and you get to make the choice. Spare the child murderer? Okay. Real talk. This is the biggest gut punch a video game had ever given me until I decided to play Lisa. I haven't played that many video games. It's accentuated by the massive build-up we had earlier and the finality of the fight we just had. This illusory ending where we spend the rest of our life with Asgore would have been a satisfying, if bittersweet, payoff to our journey, but Toby Fox decided to use his ability to get the player emotionally invested through pacing just to catch us so off guard that it hurts. And yeah, it was Flowey, that asshole from the beginning. And he did this to, prove a point? I don't know. It's never really explained, beyond just being a dickhead. So anyway, Flowey takes all the souls himself, and he actually crashes the game here. I'm honestly wondering how the PS4 version is going to go about replicating that. When you reopen the game, you get the best part of every Undertale Let's Play.
Oh shit! What the fuck? It's like Beast Flowey! Beast mode engage! I can't move! Okay, you stopped. Hi, you look nice. I never know. What the fuck?!
If the last twist was jarring, then this is a tactical nuke on your expectations. Every single rule set up before has been viciously smashed. The UI is gone, no buttons or anything like that. Flowey looks like a Photoshop collage. There aren't any walls like on other battles. The game crashes every time you lose. A button that says fight comes up, but you only do 1 point of damage. The fight is pretty successfully presented as unwinnable, although you win it by surviving long enough to play through a few fancy symbolic passages as the souls revolt against Flowey and help you win. Then you get the choice again. This factors into a theory I have about this game as a whole that I'll get back to now. Let's look back a bit. First, we met a loving and caring mother figure that only wanted to protect us. Next, we had a slightly egotistical but kind character that seemed antagonistic at first but was only seeking approval from those he looked up to. Next, we met a character who wanted to straight up murder us but let up once her deep-seated prejudices were quelled. The next person we met actively deceived and manipulated us in order to feel better about herself. Then we met Asgore murdering children is comparable to a dentist trip dreamer. And now here we are, with the omnicidal Lovecraftian plant demon who takes joy in others' pain. Do you see the trend? Undertale is training us to be a forgiving person. That's the theory I've been hinting at this whole time. It's a stretch, but I think there was an intentional effort to have the player meet incrementally harder to forgive characters. And I think that's also why it works so well as a promoter of pacifism. The moral here is that every character you meet has made mistakes, but none of them are unforgivable. Not even Flowey. At least I hope that was the intention, because otherwise, this whole sequence is completely pointless. I didn't have the same reaction as this guy. I explained exactly how this encounter was made to be as jarring as possible, but that made it worse for me. I was actually shocked entirely out of the experience, punched into a daze where I suddenly wasn't emotionally invested in the slightest. The sheer amount of rules broken in this battle left me wondering if this was a battle or a cutscene, and looking back, it was essentially a cutscene. Yeah, despite how it looks, this fight is actually really easy. Like, it's so chaotic that it's almost impossible to avoid getting hit at least once, but eventually you just kind of float through it.
Oh, and also it's a glaring plot hole.
So if Asgore is dead, how did we leave the underground? We needed his soul to get through the barrier. Sans is calling us at the end as if we've left. Were the soul economics just too confusing for even the game's writer to keep track of? Or was this entire scene an afterthought? That would make sense. It would also discredit the idea that the build-up in the hallway back there was well executed for the sake of surprise. Here's how it should have gone. Have Asgore be the final boss of the neutral route, and after he's defeated, have the choice either result in you leaving the underground alone without a plot hole, or staying with Asgore forever. All things considered, these are both pretty bad endings, which means the part after the phone call with Sans can still make sense, where Flowey suddenly shows up and says he knows how to get you a better ending. Yeah, you were probably wondering why there's so much time left in the video. Aside from the upcoming Taxxon analysis of funny games that I put in to be different, the game still has more to offer us. What we just finished was the neutral route. Even though on my first playthrough I didn't kill anything, it's the neutral route. Don't ask. So if you killed anyone throughout your session, you have to replay the game. And Toby is definitely expecting you to have killed someone. So let's play again. The second playthrough isn't an exact repetition. Toriel preemptively guesses what your favorite kind of pie is, you turn around to shake Sans' hand before he tells you to, that kind of thing. You still have to sit through all those comedic set pieces though. The game lets you skip some of them, but not enough. You play all the way to Asgore, but Flowey kills him again, acknowledges that the souls would probably just revolt again, and sends you on your way. This is annoying, but I'm pretty sure you're supposed to get the sense that you're chasing this good ending like a carrot on a stick. But since you haven't killed anyone, you don't actually have to restart this time. The only thing left to do is to visit and befriend some key characters. It's Flowey that hints you towards this, again, for reasons that will become apparent later. Most people follow Papyrus back to his house. It's close by, and he politely requests you to pay him a visit. Not Undyne, though. She just walks away without saying anything. And her house is way back in that big hub-like area after the Mad Dummy fight, and in a kind of hidden corner at that. And credit where credit is due, this scene where you befriend Undyne is the closest the game got to making me laugh out loud. We also get some pretty eye-opening moments referring to Undyne's relation to Papyrus when she talks about how she gives him cooking lessons to deter him from becoming a warrior, because he's too kind and would probably just get killed. Anyone who's experienced this game to the fullest just did a huge flash forward there. So now that we've done that, all without killing anyone, a new trigger appears when you walk from the back of the apartment building in Hotland. Undyne gives you a call and says that she has something for you to deliver. Apparently, if you happen to kill a frog back in the ruins, she doesn't feel like it. Anyway, if you go back and visit her in Snowdin Town, she gives you a love letter to give to Alphys. This probably seems a bit sudden because I haven't actually explained this part of the plot until now, but there's actually been a lot of subtle build-up to this budding romance between the DDR fish and the Otaku Triceratops. It's very touching to finally see all that get resolved in the following scene, but I still think it's a bit too funny. And then the plot explodes again. We revisit Alphys' lab to find a note on the floor informing us that she no longer wants to keep any secrets from her new friends, and inviting us to enter the door above. Through this door, we reach the True Lab, where we learn of Alphys' past attempts to find a method of breaking the magical barrier without taking any kids to the dentist. This involves some more manipulations of the already confusing soul economics that I won't go into the details of. All you need to know is that the experiment failed and Alphys ended up accidentally creating horrifying zombie abominations from dead monsters that live in constant suffering. Okay, I can explain this now. I've seen some talk on the net about how Alphys is the worst character in Undertale. My source for this is random internet comments, but you'll have to take my word for it.
All of the characters are fun and charming except Alphys. Go fuck yourself, you degenerate.
I'm pretty sure people turn on her after finding out that she had been lying to us to quell her own insecurities. But I have one thing to say to that.
Do you know what a character flaw is?
We meet Alphys at the worst part of her life, but we don't know it at the time. She has a pile of unopened letters from the families of the monsters she zombified. It's obvious that she's pretty stressed out. But after that, every step we've taken from surface-level awkward weeaboo to tortured soul racked with guilt has been like butter. I honestly don't know why more people aren't sorry for her at this point. Did they forget what game they're playing? That's the one flaw with the forgiveness progression theory I brought up earlier. I think the game should give you some sort of chance to kill or spare Alphys, because I think that would fit better into the narrative that I've pulled out of my ass. I'd put it either right after you complete the Metaton fight or right after you beat the True Lab. Have the game mechanically force players to forgive this pure soul. Anyway, after that the game heavily implies that Alphys accidentally created Flowey. Okay, so now that we've done that, we somehow take an elevator all the way to Asgore's house. Undertale makes no attempt to physically make sense, let's just roll with it. We proceed as usual, and everything happens as expected, except that this time the fight is interrupted by Toriel. I like to think she always tries this, but the detour we took to the True Lab gave her enough time to intercept the fight. She effectively saves Asgore from us, even though she's disgusted by Asgore's actions. I'm actually not quite sure what her motivation is here. This whole scene is weirdly clumsy. It gives me the same impression as the end of Return of the King. All the characters we've met come in one by one, awkwardly introducing themselves with some of the worst jokes in the game. We also don't know why everyone is here. We find out in a few minutes, but for now it's just kind of confusing. It's nice to see Toriel and Sans finally meet face to face, though. Aww. Anyway, the reason everyone came here is because Papyrus called them, and he did that because, quote, dang it. Okay, so Flowey reveals to us that he has been leading the player on this whole time, having you believe that you could get a happy ending just so you would keep playing. He's like in this Groundhog's Day type situation, and you're the only unpredictable aspect of his life. He addresses the player directly here, acknowledging that if you finish the game satisfied, you won't be able to play with him anymore. Then he does that thing again where he pretends to be completely bested by you and all your buds who have wandered in for some reason, and then he's like, no. This scene is weird. The writing and pacing are noticeably worse than the rest of the game. Is that just me? I don't know what the hell happened here, but I'm also not credible enough to know how I would fix it. So let's move on. Things finally start to pick up when Flowey goes and absorbs the 6 human souls again, along with the souls of every monster that randomly wandered in here. That still doesn't make sense. And then there's a plot twist. Flowey reveals himself to be the Prince of the Underground Asriel. You might remember him from that awful exposition dump from earlier. So now we're at the actual final boss fight. Rainbows, explosions, chiptune power metal. I mean, if you want to look at it technically, we're in exactly the same situation as we were with Photoshop Flowey. Has anyone noticed that? Again, we're trapped in a room with the same soul-fueled, all-powerful being who just wants to kill us over and over again, except it's all triumphant this time, I guess. The massive tone problem we have here is another reason to just scrap Photoshop Flowey altogether. I'm really starting to think that whole scene was just a last-minute addition. That would explain the tremendous pacing break and soul economics plot hole. Couldn't resist the let's play points, could you, Toby? So he futz around a bit with Asriel until he does this black hole thing and we get the part of Undertale that everyone remembers, actually saving the kid. First we get a beautiful sequence where we rescue the souls of our friends by way of symbolic mini-fights, and then comes a non-stop train of emotions. Now it's a bit spotty, but the game essentially reveals that Asriel had been projecting his anguish at losing his sibling onto the player character and was subconsciously chasing after that feeling of having a best friend again. He straight up begs the player to let him win, to let him erase the world and go through the motions of meeting and befriending you again. This is tragic. And it's completely unexpected as well. I've been waiting to talk about the art direction until the end, and I'll get to it in more detail then, but it's especially on point here. When Asriel does his crying face, it fucking gets me. So once again, your limitless love and resilience wins you the battle. Asriel turns back into a child and realizes that we aren't actually his long-lost sibling. The player character is actually named Frisk. Fruit, pseudonym of Danish experimental electronic/folk musician Anders Mildgaard, and author of the massively underrated 2015 album an austere mix of traditional European chamberfolk and experimental synthesizer music themed around springtime and... Sorry, the player character's name is Frisk. The name he gave at the beginning was actually the name of Asriel's sibling. The game doesn't do a good job at explaining this, but it's a good twist. Anyway, Azrael uses every soul in the underground to break down the barrier once and for all and resigns to his inevitable transformation back into a soulless flower. But not before you give him a hug. In case you were wondering, I think this is what made the game so popular. It was the tears. That's the end of the pacifist half of Undertale. I wouldn't be breaking any new ground if I said it was mainly about forgiveness. But it's not just about forgiveness, it's about loving thy enemy. Every character in Undertale has made mistakes, but none of them are bad people, and the game gets the player into this mindset almost flawlessly. This would not have worked if the characters weren't as realistic and three-dimensional as they were, as well as including my aforementioned theory about the possibly intentional order that the characters were introduced, bridging the gap from loving mother figure to Lovecraftian horror. Undertale's pacifist route gets a thumbs up from me. Although there's one more twist. Fellow content creator and fellow pretentious asshole H-Bomber Guy made a video going into this particular aspect of the game in more detail, but I'll give you the Cliff Notes version real quick. If you reopen the game after beating it, Azrael shows up again as Flowey. He notes that Frisk and the gang are all happy, but the player can still ruin it by resetting the game and whisking them all back to before they even knew each other. That's right. In the Undertale universe, reloading saves is an in-universe action that erases parts of history to be overwritten. This effectively puts a moral weight on replaying the game at all, and it's also the final piece of the puzzle of horror that is Undertale's genocide route. Undertale's genocide route is a different story with a different message. The pacifist route is a straightforward story with grand morals, while the genocide route is far more specific and meta. I should explain how it works. To get the genocide ending, you have to do some pretty specific actions. Essentially, you have to play the game as if it were any other RPG, grinding through every area the game has to offer to max your stats. Just in case you're watching this and didn't know the genocide route was a thing, you can go do it now. You'll know if you're doing it right. Hey, welcome back. Hope your emotions are still functioning. Otherwise, I'm sorry. Let's analyze this thing. The genocide route is engineered to be the polar opposite of the pacifist route. That sounds obvious when I say it, but the game makes extra steps to sell this. The pacifist route was a meaty plotline, with several well-developed characters that took me half an hour to analyze. The genocide route is bare and simple. The pacifist route is lively and full of jokes and humor. The genocide route is empty and makes extra steps to deny the player comic relief. The pacifist route is saccharine and sweet. The genocide route is depressive. Like, no kidding around, life-ruiningly depressive. I have a lot of positive and negative things to say about this route, but as I just said, it's a lot simpler to explain the sequence of events than it was with the pacifist route. So let's get to that first. We enter the first area in the ruins that has random encounters, but instead of progressing forward, we just walk around in circles and kill everything that we encounter. Eventually, this happens.
That's how a lot of the internet works.
Yeah. But it's gonna be chill. Oh, shit!
Oh.
That's new!
You might start to notice some differences after that. Firstly, the music is gone, replaced with a bunch of whale noises. This ghost that you would normally have a silly battle with just runs away. Again, the genocide route denies the player comic relief. And also the music. I mentioned the music, but I have to reinstate how much of a difference it makes when Toriel calls us to ask what our favorite kind of pie is. This scene isn't charming anymore. When we finally do get to the Toriel fight, we kill her in one hit. Before she dies though, all of her love for us dies as well and she frickin' cackles at us. Most of the death scenes in the genocide route are effective, but this one really sells a sense of foreboding. In the hallway leading to Snowdin where we meet Flowey, we find out that he actually wants to team up with us. He sees where we're going, and he decides that he's ready to declare war on humanity with us, and show everyone that the true meaning of life is to kill or be killed. He helps us by solving puzzles for us later. Thanks, Flowey. Snowdin is pretty much the same. You kill every monster you come across until they stop showing up and continue forward. Encounters with Sans and Papyrus are slightly different, subtle dialogue changes here and there. You also skip through all the puzzles, ruining the fun for everyone, including the player. This continues on for a while, but then we get the most quoted line in the game. So we enter the nice town place again and find it evacuated. The shop is empty, except for a note that you find. Anyway, it's time to fight Papyrus, except the game throws a pretty big curveball at you here. As you start breaking the cutscene again, Papyrus notices that you've been shambling around with dust on your fingers, dust being the remains of dead monsters. He doesn't flat out say, "I know that you've been murdering a bunch of people, but I think the game is still trying to pretend that it's G-rated at this point." And being the tragically innocent skeleton he is, he refuses to fight you in the hopes that you'll stop doing what you're doing, because all you need is a friend. And even after you friggin' decapitate him, he forgives you. You're blue now. That's his attack. That's one of the best things about the genocide route. The consequences of your actions sneak up on you. Whale noises aside, the route doesn't really give you that many clues that you're actually changing much. Dialogue differences are almost unnoticeable until you kill Toriel. The death of Papyrus is when you really know that you're making an impact. It's the emotional point of no return. I don't think the genocide route would be as remembered as it is if it went full force on the emotions right when you killed the first frog. Anyway, we're off to Waterfall. Things play out pretty similarly as they do in the Pacifist route, except all the throwaway characters are gone. All but one, this monster kid who I neglected to mention in the first portion of the video. Later, you murder him. Except no, because Undyne comes to save the day and transforms into a supercharged version of herself, and it's aggravatingly hard. This is unexpected. After one-shotting everyone up to this point, Uberfish Lady takes 30. It's most certainly harder than anything in the Pacifist route. Surprisingly, this factors into a pretty big criticism I have for the genocide route as a whole, but we'll get back to that later. Anyway, she dies with a smile on her face knowing that Alphys is evacuating the underground and the world will live on. Okay, and now we're at Hotland. The routine is set. Kill everything and move on. Except it still works if you skip Hotland and kill everything in the core instead. Don't know why. Hotland goes by pretty quickly because Flowey solved all the puzzles for us. You kill Muffet in one hit. Good riddance. Metaton transforms into his mega form and you kill him in one hit. That Undyne fight is sticking out more and more, huh? We get another exposition dump at the end, and it's the best part of the route. Instead of a bunch of monsters like last time, it's just Flowey, and he decides to tell us everything about his past. To summarize, he suddenly woke up as a flower after dying as Asriel, but found he had the player's current ability to rewind time by loading save files. Because he was a flower, he was also completely emotionless and lacked the ability to love anyone, so he's essentially been in a depressive Groundhog's Day scenario for who knows how long. And one day he just decided to kill everyone because it was the last thing to do. And that's what you did! This is the best singular exchange in the entirety of Undertale. I'm not breaking that much new ground when I say this, but that's the message of the genocide route. At its core, the genocide route is about completionism and gamer habits. Hopefully, this little story Flowey gives us makes the players stop and think for a bit. I see the murder of every monster in the underground as a stand-in for self-imposed challenges, in this case the challenge of completely maxing your level. It's something that I imagine an unsuspecting Undertale fanatic would do, not knowing that Toby actually put narrative content in there. Through the decision to put a moral weight on even replaying the game after completing it, I think that we are being asked as to why we do this. Why we wish to run our favorite games through the ringer so we don't have to stop playing, even if it really just isn't fun at all. Now I think this metaphor falls in a couple places, some of which you might have already noticed, but I'm going to finish explaining the sequence of events before I get to that. There's still some important stuff left. So after Flowey tells us all this, he finally puts 2 and 2 together and realizes that we're going to murder him too. That's a good eye you got there. And then comes the part that everyone remembers. We finally meet Sans again. He's actually been absent from the game ever since we murdered his brother. Instead of the judging scene, we get the other best part of every Undertale Let's Play. Oh! Oh! Whoa! Ah! Sans wrecks our shit. Sans is by far the biggest challenge in the entire game, no question about it. There's a lot more after that initial barrage, and it is balls tough. The only way to really get through it is to beat the muscle memory into your fingers until you can power through it. This is the switcheroo I was talking about earlier. The apathetic Tom Bombadil skeleton has finally unleashed his true power. That's not all that's going on though. Sans has a very important monologue going on here if you can pay attention to it. He essentially reveals that his laziness is brought on by his awareness of the player's power to rewind time. He doesn't even care about getting above ground because he knows that everything could just be erased at any time, which it was. He refers to you as an anomaly, a force of nature that he thought he could reason with but ultimately failed. This explains everything. The half-assed snowman, the mailbox full of letters, the endless napping. This is the most overanalyzed part of the game. After all that shit, Sans tells you he's going to unleash his special attack, and after a bit more tomfoolery, you find out that it's just an empty screen forever. He gives you a final speech, essentially accusing the player directly that they are doing this for no other reason other than that it's possible and therefore counts as more content to consume, effectively putting a cap on the anti-completionist message. Of course, the idiot falls asleep, allowing us to push the battle screen over to the fight button and press it. Nice job. He shambles off screen and dies hallucinating a trip to a restaurant with his brother. Also, he bleeds. Not sure what the significance of that is. Anyway, we move on to Asgore's chamber where we find out Flowey is trying to warn him about us. We kill him in one hit, but in the last-ditch effort to get on our side, Flowey deals the finishing blow to his own dad and pleads for us not to kill him. 3 guesses as to what happens next. Jesus. And then the first human, or their soul, or the physical manifestation of completionist mindsets, or the player themselves, or whatever the fuck, appears. They give us a little speech about stats increasing before offering to destroy the world and move on to another. I'm pretty sure destroying the world represents the player having done everything there is to be done in the world and achieving the highest level stat possible, and thus exhausting the game of its content. It gives you a choice here. Most people choose do not, which leads to a jump scare and the world being destroyed anyway. The game quits, and if you reopen it, you just get a black screen with wind noises. But if you wait for 10 minutes, the entity speaks and offers to rebuild the world in exchange for the player's soul. So now the game is back. If you play through the pacifist route again, nothing will be different, aside from the creeping sense that everything you're doing is a charade for the sake of getting the happy ending again. After solving everyone's problems and freeing all monsters from the underground, as per usual, the credits roll just as they did, except this happens at the end. So that's the genocide route. You already heard my positive thoughts, but to explain the negatives we're going to have to talk about a movie. I'll wrap this all back, just trust me. There are 4 films that I've seen that I would describe as flawless. They are, in order of release date, 2001: A Space Odyssey, Tron, Kiki's Delivery Service, and Funny Games US. This film is so good, guys, you have no idea. I think it's better than the original, but you have to know what Funny Games is all about to understand why. And seriously, everyone should see this movie. Go watch it, right now. I knew you skimped out on it at the beginning, but go watch it. It's on Netflix. Last chance. Okay. Funny Games begins like your average run-of-the-mill home invasion horror movie. A shiny upper-class white family drives to their shiny vacation home, but soon they start getting harassed by these 2 gentlemen in golf attire and eventually get taken hostage. Up to this point, Funny Games has been a pretty straightforward first act of a torture porn, but what follows is a straight-up vicious satire of that exact genre and of violence in cinema in general. It makes us think about what we actually enjoy about violence for violence's sake by presenting a cliched and trite slasher flick, but with victims that act like actual human beings, struggle for their survival, visibly suffer at the hands of discount Leonardo DiCaprio. It does this by stripping away the Hollywood sheen, the glorification. Apart from the opening and closing credits, there is no non-diegetic music, no scary string sections to remind you that it's just a movie. Shots linger on for unreasonable amounts of time. There's no fast-paced, action-packed editing to remind you that it's just fiction. The film is anti-voyeuristic in that way. You're forced to suffer along with this family. You can't just be an observer. And while those obnoxious fourth wall breaks really should detract from this, it actually doesn't. It pulls the audience in. Funny Games doesn't break the fourth wall, it's constructed without one. And also at the end, it heavily implies that we have inadvertently caused the suffering of these people by consuming the work they exist in. Yikes. There's another layer to it though. It's never concretely explained why the 2 gentlemen are torturing the family, but the combination of Paul's awareness of the audience and this line that sneaks right past you in the friggin' trailer.
Why don't you just kill us? You shouldn't forget the importance of entertainment.
It makes me think that it's for us, the slasher flick going public. That would explain why they don't really seem to take any joy in what they're doing, why they make Naomi Watts take off her clothes and say nothing more of it, why Paul gets mad at the other guy for killing the kid first. You're not supposed to kill the kid first. So why do I think the US version is superior to the Austrian original? Aside from better camera quality and performances, we must remember that Funny Games is primarily a critique of testosterone-riddled American cinema. An American cast and setting would make sense. Especially now that it's 2007 and Saw and Hostel have been big hits. The genre is ripe for some backhanded satire. Also, having a sexy celebrity actress like Naomi Watts playing a part effectively heightens the illusion that we're watching a normal slasher flick. Also, this is an unpopular read, but there's totally a message here about the dehumanization of female talent in the film industry. The illusion is so good, in fact, that it leads mediocre nostalgia critic Backwash to actually try to review it as a horror film. This is Phalus, and truth be told, watching this man desperately try to get comedic mileage out of reviewing Funny Games is both tragic and hilarious.
Well, very exciting. I love those stairs. Oh, and the floor. Oh, and the inside of the fridge.
He doesn't mention the message or anything until a follow-up video 3 years down the line, which is honestly even worse.
But before I get into that, I want to say that there's no way the message of this film excuses what the film actually shows us. And one of the most baffling things I've ever heard in this movie's defense was it wasn't supposed to be entertaining. I'm sorry, I guess I missed the point of movies then.
Do you really just watch movies to pass the time? That's it? Phalus, we figured this shit out a long time ago, okay? Film is more than just being your goddamn babysitter for an hour and a half. And if you keep expecting movies to pamper you, eventually Michelle Haneke is going to sit you down and give you a talk.
I suppose that's supposed to be artistic, huh?
Okay, honestly, this is the worst video on YouTube. Sorry, I got sidetracked a bit. There's still one more thing I need to explain about Funny Games before I flawlessly tie it back into Undertale. As we've seen, Funny Games pretends to be the archetypal slasher flick, but it's missing something. What is it? I'll tell you. It's the gore. There's no gore in this movie. Everything happens off screen. The typical horror movie going public that the film marketed to is constantly being denied the payoff, the gruesome bloody murder a la Saw or Hostel. A kid gets shot in the head with a shotgun off screen and all we can see is this. The only explicit visible gore in Funny Games would be when Naomi shoots one of the boys in the stomach, but if you remember, that didn't happen. Okay, Michelle, you're testing me here. I mean, the film makes a point that it's just as unpleasant without showing gore on screen. That scene where the dog dies is still one of the most heart-stopping moments in all of cinema. Could Michelle be making a point here that surface-level shock value is the easiest and most vapid way to get across emotional impact? Maybe, but the important thing is that he's denying the viewer the payoff, the reward for watching through all this. Okay, keeping this in mind, why does Undertale's genocide route give the player what they want? Yeah, everyone dies, but the two most challenging battles by far take place in the genocide route. The player who desperately wants more Undertale content to the point where they would murder all their beloved characters just to see what happens is rewarded with more content. These battles also create a massive tone disconnect. Flowey is telling you his tragic story and the pieces of meaning are falling into place, and then you fight Sans and there's bones everywhere! You really like swanging that thing around, huh? If you asked me, I think every boss should have died in one hit, except for Sans, who would do his dodge thing and immediately do his special nothing attack and give a speech. This way, the anti-completionist's message wouldn't be muddied by the fun battles that you can only get by murdering everyone. And as a bonus, you aren't happy about the death of the sadistic cheating skeleton that's been tormenting you for the past 5 hours. If there's anything that Sans' death shouldn't be, it's satisfying. This definitely isn't the popular opinion. YouTuber Haydock seems to think that the genocide route isn't fun enough.
Trying to kill all the enemies in an area until none are left is asinine. How is aimlessly wandering around waiting for the right enemy to pop up fun?
That's very wrong, and I think Haydock needs to have a sit down with Mr. Haneke. That's my biggest problem with the genocide route. I'm not done yet, though. The other biggest problem with the genocide route is that the comedic battles are still here. You know who I don't care about murdering? Tsundere Plane. What bearing does this thing have on the plot, besides messing up the tone? The only non-boss enemies that you fight that you can also meet and talk to later are the dog people. The rest are simply one-shot non-characters that the player has zero connection to. The genocide route likes to pretend that you're killing everyone and leaving the world bare, but that's not what's happening. You go to Snowden Town and it's empty, but only because everyone got away. Everyone you can talk to in Waterfall and Hotland got away too. To fix this, I'd just drop all of these one-shot comedic moments and replace them with the actual characters that you know and can talk to. Or have the more sympathetic monsters you fight, like Snowdrake and Shyren, show up later so that their absence is really noticed. There's a lot of ways to do this, and I'm sure a lot of other people can come up with their own, but I'm also certain that filling the roster up with jokes is not one of them. Also, minor pet peeve, but why is the music just slowed down music from the other half of the game? You know how easy it is to make creepy ambient music? Okay, here, I'll do it for you. That took about an hour to make, total. For business inquiries, email me at this address. And that's my thoughts on the genocide route. And let's be honest, the only original part of this video so far. We're done with the text of Undertale, but there's still some other things to talk about, like the art and music. Now, I mostly blame this on the development team being small enough to fit in a car, but this game doesn't look so hot. Now, some of it's great. These facial expressions that pop up next to the dialogue have just enough detail to get across exactly what the characters are feeling. Especially Alphys. Her character presents a lot of different sides to the same coin, and every single time she just sells it. Same with the battle sprites. The true pacifist ending would not be what it was without that art direction. But oh honey, everywhere else it falls flat. I'm sorry, there just aren't enough pixels here. Every character is hampered by their low resolution, especially the smaller ones like Alphys and Asriel. Now the environmental design is so inconsistent that I think it might be intentional. The ruins is by far the ugliest part of the game, with just huge areas of purple and nothing else, no detail, no effort to put across an atmosphere. But after that, it incrementally gets more and more detailed as the game goes on, the culminating moment being at the True Lab. Compare these two. Maybe this is intentional, maybe it isn't. I don't really like it either way. Okay, there's one more thing to talk about, and it's almost why I made this video. I saved it for the end. The Undertale soundtrack isn't good! Okay, video game soundtracks aren't really that great in general. There are only 3 games I've played that I'd say have great soundtracks. Minecraft, Risk of Rain, and Love. But this is the most alone I have ever felt in absolutely hating something. The Undertale soundtrack is one of 2 releases I've rated 0.5 out of 5 on rateyourmusic.com. The other one is Otaku Hearts. She's so why he can't deny she's the one for me. So, why do I hate this shit so much? Oh, lots of reasons, but for one, I have a special aversion to chiptune music. Whoever decided that we should keep using these robot fart noises in our music after programmers found out that there were more than 4 waveforms should be put to death. Because chiptune is for talentless hacks who want to get nostalgic geek points without learning anything about sound design. Sorry you had to learn this way. The instrumentation overall on this soundtrack is gross, muddy, and unoriginal. Everything that isn't uninspired chip buzzing is MIDI piano and other sound font vomit. There isn't a single track where I can't see the piano roll in my head as I listen to it.
Oi! You're just an ignorant teenager with no appreciation for the good old days, you—
Okay, hold it there, Joseph. You're right about one thing. I am a teenager. I didn't grow up with Mario and Link, so I'll admit there's a lot of nostalgic value that I'm missing. But then you'd have to explain why I have such a liking for early electronic music. I fuck with Kraftwerk, I fuck with Vangelis, and I fuck with everyone they've inspired in later decades like Boards of Canada. Way more than nerds trying to recreate the Metroid soundtrack. Cause you know what? Boards of Canada spend ages and ages making those drums sound as squishy as they do, using their collective creative genius to fine-tune those drum machines to sound as warm and squelchy as possible. On the other hand, I can make this shit in under an hour. Did you enjoy that? Because I hated making it. But that's not what everyone loves about it, Eric, I hear you cried. They like the melodies, the harmonies, the leitmotifs. No, stop with this bullshit. There are 2 effective ways to use leitmotifs in a soundtrack, and Toby refused to use either of them. Let's take a look at Risk of Rain's soundtrack. While listening to the score, you might but probably won't notice that Chris included this particular descending 4-note phrase in many of the tracks. But that's just it. 4 notes. It's not a theme, it's a flavor. They aren't even all exactly the same. It's a subtle way of making the tracks feel connected without shoving it in your face. Meanwhile, Toby Fox reuses entire passages even when it doesn't make any sense and the melodies hijack the chord progressions they're lazily placed on. Side note, I actually showed my dad that second track, and when that part came up, he looked really confused until I said it was a leitmotif. After that, he understood why it was so awful. The track during Asriel's boss fight actually exemplifies a lot of glaring problems with the soundtrack, and I'll definitely be coming back to it. The other way leitmotifs are used is the more traditional way, i.e. the way every decent film soundtrack uses it. Like when you watch Lord of the Rings, you'll notice certain themes popping up more than once, like every time you meet a certain character or every time you revisit a certain location. This is leitmotifs as a tool for narrative, and I'm fine with that. Undertale throws us out of the fucking window. Tell me, what is the thematic connection between Undyne and the Purple Ruins? They share a massive section with each other. What's the connection? Has Undyne even been to the ruins? Does Muffet have any relation to Napstablook? Their themes are copies. I'm pretty sure they haven't even met. The tune that plays during the intro comes up in this hotel. Why here? Is it trying to be some sort of overarching main theme? Because I'm pretty sure it only comes up 5 times in the whole game. I'm really sick of everyone fetishizing these leitmotifs to no end. Like, guys, did you notice that there's a melody here? Then we've already heard it! Oh my god! But I'm not done. I'd also like to say that Toby Fox is fucking terrible at structuring his shit. So many of the tracks just repeat something 4 times and then repeat another thing 4 times. The boss themes are the worst cases of this. Undyne, Muffet, and especially Asriel just have these blocks of repeating phrases with little to no thought given to transitioning between them. If you're going to be repetitive, you fucking sell it. Did you even try? So, that was my experience with Undertale. This video took me about 4 months to write, and I spent so much time recording the voiceover that you can hear me slowly getting better at emoting as the video goes on. And just in case this video gets popular, I'm going to remind everyone who gets this far to click that subscribe button. Apparently that works. I don't actually know. Writing and producing this video took way more out of my life than I was expecting, but I have more stuff planned, mostly music related. Also, I really appreciate feedback, so if you would, leave a comment for me and let me know what you thought of the video. If I'm horrifically wrong about everything and need to die in a pit of fire, you tell me that. You deserve to let off some steam after enduring me for that long. Thanks, everybody!